Welcome, welcome. I almost didn't do anything tonight. In a bit of a piss poor mood is what I'm in. Anyway. All right, so. Oh, for pity's sake. I don't know why Discord behaves that way. So I am attempting to learn a little bit more about Discord to potentially use it for some other things. Oh, I forgot some stuff over there. I was doing stuff earlier today that I was totally enjoying and getting into, but the world has decided to be its own monstrous self and ruin my mood, so I don't have a lot of interest or energy today. And it sucks because I've only got a few days left before I have to be an expendable employee again. So there's that. So wasting my last few days. I will grab that other stuff though. All right, so, ouch. I'm gonna have that problem all night long, aren't I? Okay, so this is gonna look a little cheesy, I think, but this is, where's the other side of that page, I think, yeah? This is some of the stuff I was working on for the constructed languages that I've been playing with lately. So, trying to get different shapes there for alphabets. And here's one of the kind of expanded approaches to it. I did do sideways most of it. It was one of those things where, like, I'm building a script that has some things in common with OGHAM, OGHAM. That is the alphabet that the Druids used for some of their ritual stuff. And it's marked by a series of lines on a central, there's essentially branches on a tree is what they were doing. And different numbers of branches meant different letters. And some of it's somewhat influenced by Arabic and Hebrew. And so I did some playing and exploring some of that option around the premise that I'm trying to build a set number of sound sets based somewhat off of the hexagrams used in I Ching or Yi Jing hexagrams. So there are 64 of those hexagrams that you can build using a total of 6 lines. Now, if you do that, a set of 6 lines done in this format can form 64 different sound sets. And when you look at some of the Asiatic languages that use consonant vowel pairings, you can get a full linguistic index from those kinds of arrangements. So that's sort of what I started playing around with. But it sort of leads to what I wanted to do was there's a technique for graphing harmonics that you can put into a visual format. It's usually meant to compare the ratios of things. And there were some sacred geometry focused individuals who adapted some of the ideas towards measuring the visual arts ratios of the human form and other things like that. So they're looking at, what is it, phi, or yeah, I think it's the golden ratio, and the mapping using those harmonic ratio indicators would get you something like that. Probably, I think that's upside down, but you can see how that's an interesting visual element. Now, if you use that central pillar that runs the middle of it as the focus for where you're placing your letters off of, like in the OM alphabet, you can do sort of like that. And doesn't that remind you a little bit of a double helix? And so I'm like, I was totally getting into that today. And I was reviewing some of the ideas I had for, ruined that notebook. Cool. Thanks for being a jerk. Some of the styles I've been doing for the Dwarvish alphabet. I mean, that's the Gnomish alphabet. The Dwarvish alphabet, I want to be more based off of something else, a different style. And the alphabet, or the Dwarvish language, is going to be distinctly different, but its alphabet is going to be more styled after an Art Deco style of alphabet. And I want it to be, it's going to have some similarity in the fact that you're going to be able to write it in different, well, that one is pretty much dictating a linear writing system. The Dwarvish alphabet is going to be sequential, but could be written any way you want to on a page. And I want to base it off of sort of, again, a string of pearls almost idea, but you can change the direction of the string at any time, change the shape, and do different things with it. So there's that. I've been playing with that for the last couple of days and having some fun with it. I didn't want to not do it because I've had that little bit of inspiration for it, but at the same time I feel like there's not a lot of anything worth really talking about right now for most things. But I gotta change my mind on how I think about that. Like, if I'm interested in having fun with it, I should just talk about it. That's what I'm supposed to be doing with my channels. That's the way I want to be doing things here, is things I'm enjoying and get a value from playing with. I want to be able to just express that enjoyment and not say like, oh, well, let's just cultivate only certain things. And I feel like that plan of only share certain things is part of where I get into trouble, because my interests are sort of all over the place, and I should just embrace that and just explore that. Anyway, so we are almost 10 minutes into tonight's episode, and I have not talked about what I set up to talk about tonight. So last night we were chit-chatting about League of an Extraordinary Gentleman we started with, and then we shifted over to how to reimagine Jurassic Park. So let's pull up that document. Come on. My mind is not in the game. I'm not focusing particularly well. It's going to be interesting to see if I can sleep at all tonight. All right, so I could probably add Ready Player One in there. And Treasure Island. That's one of the things I was thinking about when I Treasure Island. When I was thinking about these projects and how to describe them, because every time I start one of these videos, I'm like, how am I going to title this video? And what am I actually doing? Well, I'm taking, I guess we can call them classic story ideas now, but I'm taking ideas for classic stories of movie, book, and that's the thing. Haven't really filled out any of these spaces with anything from books or anything like that. I think we've done comic books, and we've done movies, and we've done TV, but not literary fiction. And so I might change that up a little bit and expand it a little bit more. But we're taking those ideas and we're pulling them apart, seeing what they're made of, and then putting those parts together in a new story idea. So I think last night we really pretty much covered everything there was to talk about with the Jurassic Park version, which was essentially saying, all right, Ramius, I think I said that wrong. You suggested that instead of dinosaurs, we could do criminals. And I got to thinking, like, I don't know that a park full of humans is a good way to go. I don't think anybody would ever get behind the idea of a human zoo. I know there was an art human zoo exhibit in France, I think, at one point. And they paid an intern to stay in a house, and that was pretty much it. And then that has a limited novelty to it. It's not an attraction that you're going to get a lot of people paying. Well, their first approach to do it was a young female intern, so you did get a fair amount of people, which is creepy and weird. I don't get that part, but okay. Well, no, it's not okay. But anyway, so a human zoo I didn't think would work particularly well. But the other part of that issue was the cloning of historical figures. You're going to get the body the same, but the thing that makes a historical figure significant is their mind and their memories and their personality. And a clone is just like an identical twin. You're not going to get the same person. So I feel like on that front, I think it misses. But, and it's not a bad approach. You could try something like that. Like the idea at the top of my head right now is, if you built something like that, it wouldn't be humans going to a human zoo. It would be humans in a human zoo of a race of beings who study us as we study animals in a zoo. There's a way to make that story work, but that's not the one I ended up working on. What we ended up doing while we were chit-chatting last night was more of a mix of Ready Player One, maybe a little bit of The Matrix thrown in, where you live in a cyberpunk society and escape into a World of Warcraft kind of society. And what happens with an NPC, a computer-programmed character that maybe gains sentience of its own and can backtrack across that signal and load itself into a human body. And I looked at it as two possible ways. You have the possibility of the obvious one of swapping with somebody, leaving them stuck behind. This is just code within a computer. Well, you take their body and ride it around in this cyberpunk setting. Or you could have it such that you could, an AI could plug itself into a human brain and be a parasitic passenger, essentially. And expanding that further, I ended up doing something along the lines of, what if an AI swapped with a person? The person was stuck in the virtual reality realm and had to quest through that fantasy realm to find somebody they could interact, find where their body is, and B, stop whatever they're doing. And going even further, the possibility of taking that character out of the game, but not into a new body, have them be able to traverse through devices. And then even further along in that adventure, the possibility of uncovering the fact that the being inside that person's body is freeing people from freeing NPC programs from inside the matrix and putting them into fleshy bodies. And so I really think you can string that story. You can really string that story sequence together in the right way to get us a coherent, interesting narrative of this Jurassic Park of a place where you're visiting alien fantasy races and beings in an environment that you couldn't otherwise encounter. It's a zoo for the fantasy world. It's a safari through the fantasy world where you get, and maybe what you could do is we could theoretically use the characters in your fantasy setting. So you might be able to, base your characters off of certain celebrities or whatnot. And maybe they do choose criminals with their genetic material in the data records to say, like, okay, so these villains, the ones that we're going to end up killing, we don't want to kill Mother Teresa. We want to, not have that on our conscience. So we can do that element of it. But anyway, it seems like a weird departure, and it may not be as true to the original premise of Jurassic Park, but it's going to have that park that you visit that has living attractions of interest. Something goes horribly wrong. It endangers the lives of the people there. And the things from the park escape. And the threat is that they may become a growing threat in the outside world. I think that's kind of what it looks like. It's departed so much from the original formula of an amusement park ride through a space filled with monsters. It's not as clearly obvious that that's what we're doing. Anyway, we've played with that. We're 20 minutes in. So what do you say we pick another one? Okay, so my top picks on this list look like Terminator, Matrix, Roger Rabbit, Ghostbusters, Bill and Ted's Empire Records, Fantasy Island, Fantasy Island might be a little bit tricky because it's an anthology series for the most part. Edward Scissorhands, Greatest American Hero, Buffy. How would we redo Buffy now? And then X-Files, Quantum Leap, Gremlins. Gremlins is another one that's very iconically itself. Beetlejuice, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, and Twin Peaks. That's my like creme de la creme of my list here. How would we redo Buffy now? Like, I started that idea, and then we also have Toy Story is one of the other ones that I think is Toy Story, Gremlins, and Buffy are all very specifically themselves. It becomes very difficult to do that series without being blatant about what you're doing. So let's play with it and see if we can escape that fate. So Toy Story, Gremlins, and Buffy. Okay, so the premise of Gremlins is a cute, exotic alien creature-ish thing that when exposed to water replicates. And when fed after midnight, turn into monstrous evil creatures. Well, here's the question I really have about that. Like, in the Gremlins movie, Gizmo was cute and friendly. The creatures that spawned from Gizmo, they were always a bit of a punk jerk. I feel like the Spike, or was it Spike or Mohawk or whatever, character was always going to be a problem. I think they only went from being a jerk, badly behaved pet to a full-on predatory monster when they changed. And they wanted to change. I feel like there's room to play with that story, but I'm not sure where to go with it right now. So I think we'll sideline that for right now. Unless in the process of playing with the rest of these, my brain latches onto something. Okay, Toy Story is also a little bit difficult because there have been movies that have been made that are toys come to life. But I feel like the thing that makes Toy Story itself is that Toy Story was a children's movie about growing out of childhood and nature of the consequence to the things that you owned as a child. So, like, if we were to take an approach there, it wouldn't be a story about toys that come to life. It would be a story, and I feel like the alternative to that is another movie that Pixar did. The what was it? Inside Out, where the little girl's emotions and memories are the factor that are there, and the toy angle translated over to other playthings like video games is Wreck-It Ralph. And so, like, Wreck-It Ralph, Toy Story, Inside Out, they're there's different avenues of telling the same story, the same type of story. And I'm not sure what would be the other way to do that. Like children's drawings. I don't know. Like you're personifying aspects of childhood. Imaginary friends? No, we got Bing Bong in Inside Out. And I suppose you could take it in a direction similar to Peter Pan, where a child's dreams are a real place. Oh, that could get really dark too. And I mean, again, Peter Pan did it, so. What else? Yeah, Toy Story just may not be the one to play with tonight. Unless there's somebody who has ideas that they want to propose. In the meantime, let's have a look-see at Buffy the Vampire Slayer. This, if my memory serves me, is something my sister was a big fan of. And it has its origins in a comedy movie. The original premise was a ditzy cheerleader who turns out to be the chosen one to defeat a vampire incursion. My usual pattern of taking something like this is to swap things around. So instead of monsters and fantasy, we do science fiction. Instead of female, we do male. If we do those two things, I feel like we have Flash Gordon. So I'm like, no, that doesn't quite work where I want to go with that. That's not really what we're doing, I don't think. So the idea of the hyper-competent nerd character, I believe, would be Artemis Fowl. And that's not quite the right direction for this. Buffy was a story about overcoming monsters. Okay, so let's see what we come up with just doing a quick search for the kind of concept of monster. Monster. So what does that get us? No, I don't. No, I want the job site. God, I swear, it's just garbage. Getting results anymore ever off of the internet has become harder than it ever was. How can you be this bad at it? God, it's such a dork move to behave that way. A 2010 British science fiction horror film. I'm just kind of curious about it, but okay, so monster is oftentimes a grotesque creature. And we'll look at that one in a minute. But for right now, Monster, the 2010 film. Monsters takes place years after a NASA probe crashed in Mexico, which led to the sudden appearance of giant tentacled monsters. It follows an American photojournalist tasked with escorting his employer's daughter back to the United States by crossing through Mexico's infected zone, where the creatures reside. That's not really what we're looking for, I don't think. All right, so monster is a type of grotesque creature whose appearance frightens or whose powers of destruction threaten the human world's social or moral order. A monster can also be like a human, but in folklore, they're commonly portrayed as the lowest caste, as mutants, deformed, supernatural, and otherworldly. Okay, there's just a hint of something to play with there. Okay, so we have this idea of a mutant monster, and that makes me stop and think, like, we've done a Flash Gordon-y science fiction version of this thing, but what about a post-apocalyptic? Like Buffy isn't fighting vampires, she's fighting mutant monsters after an apocalypse. I feel like that ruins some of it. Some of the appeal of Buffy was the not quite Harry Potter of it. The mundane kid in a mundane world trying to live a mundane life, and on the side being a secret avenger against the supernatural. Is there a way to get a character starting out as a mundane character and trying to maintain that while fending off mutants from the apocalypse? Types of apocalypse would be an important question to figure out. Apocalypse. Okay, apocalypse and post-apocalyptic fiction. Aliens, astronomical, environmental disaster. Okay, so the world doesn't have to have collapsed, but pollution has to be the instigator. This is feeling a little bit like and it's maybe a good thing we're moving sort of in the cheesy direction again, get into something like a Captain Planet, where you have ordinary kids from around the world granted a ring that grants them power to summon Captain Planet, who's going to defeat the forces of polluters and villains. And so environmental disaster, failure of technology, the collapse of the fossil fuel industry, pandemic. I don't know that we want to do that. And you risk getting too far into the zombie apocalypse with that approach. Ooh, wasn't there? I think there was a series of movies done when I was younger, Tromaville horror films. We can look that up. Okay, war and what's other? So let's jump down to other just to see what else I got. Supernatural apocalypse. In it, there is a battle over the end of the world between dragons of heaven and dragons of earth. Hayao Miyazaki's Nausicaa in the Valley of the Winds. That's not a bad place to take some of the inspiration from. Neon Genesis Evangelion. Attack on Titan. Fist of the North Star. Battle Angel Alita is a cyberpunk manga about an amnesiac female cyborg. Okay. Arthur C. Clarke's The 9 Billion Names of God. Soylent Green is a food shortage. Left Behind. No, so Escape from New York, The Wheel of Time is set in a fictional post-apocalyptic world with a medieval society. Ubisoft, nope. Okay, so let's go back up. What were some of the things we were pursuing here? Tromaville. Tromaville. Troma, not Tomaville. You don't autocorrect me, you little dork. Okay, so we got Trauma Entertainment is an American independent film distributor company founded by low-budget independent films, primarily of the horror genre. Many of them play on the 1950s horror with elements of farce, parody, gore. Okay, hang on. Let's see, what do we got? Films, okay. Blood Junkies, Blood-Sucking Freaks, Cannibals, the musical, Class of Nukem High. Class of Nukem High is a 1986 American science fiction horror comedy film made by cult classic. Yeah, well, whatever. It was. Come on! I should have trekked through so much of this. The film follows the events that unfold at Tromaville High School in New Jersey, which is conveniently located next to a nuclear power plant. An accident at the nuclear power plant is covered up by the plant owner, Mr. Paley, who does not want the facility shut down by the Safety Commission. The accident causes a radioactive water leak, which ends up gruesomely killing a student at the school after the tainted water reaches the drinking fountain. The gang of the school, called the Cretins, who were originally part of the Honor Society, torment the school and its implied that they have been turned into violent psychopaths by the runoff from the power plant. They pick leaves from the radioactive marijuana plant located in the yard, the nuclear power plant, and sell it for $10. At his indoor bikini beach party that night, Eddie pressures his friends Warren and Warren's girlfriend, Chrissy, into smoking the radioactive joint, but it is accidentally ruined by the dancers before anyone else can take it. The mutated drug shows itself to have potent aphrodisiac effects. Okay, so what we're looking at here is potentially a playground for this. We could do some sort of environmental pollution, fracking compounds in the groundwater. Something to that effect, causing see, I'm going back and forth on this a little bit. I may just abandon the mutant apocalypse altogether, but I do like the idea of, there was a movie called Monsters versus Aliens. I think that was it. Oh, come on. Where is the cursor? Come on. Jeez. So Monsters versus Aliens. Yes, that's the name of that movie. And they use a lot of the B-movie horror, the B-horror movie monsters as an opposition to an alien invasion, like a B-movie alien invasion. And I feel like that sort of gets us some of what we're working at here. So I got to refocus and remember that we're trying to do Buffy the Vampire Slayer as... Do we want to... Buffy the Vampire Slayer. No, I mean, the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, we departed completely from the base. Jurassic Park, we departed from the base. So I don't think we have to stick to it. So with that in mind, do we start with a random character? So male, female. My usual response to that question is, why not both? So let's do that. Can we figure out how do we do that? Okay, so here we go. Oh, dang. It's like some of these have been done already. So what I'm thinking of here is, and I should say these out loud and not just think them to myself, but there's a movie, what's it called? There's a movie I remember from when I was younger that I saw on late night TV where a young man who's in the detective force meets a young woman who's a reluctant vampire. And he tries to rescue her from that whole situation. Let's and see if I can get the information on that one. Anyway, so that idea here. So we start with Innocent Blood is the movie I'm thinking about. So Mary is a vampire with a conscience. That's what we're looking for. So this premise of Buffy the Vampire Slayer starting out with a human female who's seemingly ordinary, but is the chosen one to oppose a vampire apocalypse. And switching it up so that it's not human female falls in love with Angel, who's a vampire with a conscience. That's what this is. This is the flipping of those roles. But the problem that I came across when I was thinking about when this popped into my head is there's also another movie called what is it? It's Underworld. Yeah, and that's a female vampire who didn't want to be a vampire, but accepted that as something she needed to go and do what she needed. And that conversion to being a hunter in the war between vampires and werewolves, that's Underworld. And so it does exist. So do we want her to be the hunter? The problem I have with making a female vampire, partnering her with a male human, the problem I have with that approach is if she's not a badass, the story gets weak. It's just another guy saves the poor girl who's in a position she doesn't want to be in. Unless we make her an actual monster. She's not in need of rescue. He's using her. Ooh, that's a really weird twist to take for this. This is moving into a territory that departs completely from the fun, adventurous romp that Buffy starts with. I guess it's okay to do that because I mean we're rebuilding something completely different. Okay, so I have to really, really think about this one now. So if we start this out with a female vampire who is just a murderous monster, and she damages the life and happiness of the male main character. And he has to do something to solve that problem in some way that gives him the ability to defeat her. And in doing so, he ends up binding her to him. or somehow they are bound together. Sort of, maybe even like a Harry Potter story, where Voldemort is bound to Harry Potter in a certain way. Does she have to be a vampire? Could she be a werewolf? Maybe. Oh, that's tricky. Maybe even just moving a little bit outside of the territory of specifically focusing on vampires and werewolves. That idea of there's a secret underworld of supernatural monsters in a sort of fight. Oh, this is starting to sound like one of my other short stories. I got to be careful here. A world in which supernatural characters. Oh, yeah, it is. I have a couple short stories, and there were things that I combined into my mega fantasy setting a little while back. I had the idea of the werewolves, and so the skinwalkers, and the more traditional werewolves as being two different subsets of. Oh, okay, yeah. So I have to think about that a little bit differently. I got to skirt that just a bit because I don't want to mix them too much. How can we do this? Okay, here's a little chunk of territory that I haven't dabbled in a little while. I had a series idea for a web comic that I was working on at one point, where the idea was that you have two minions who are, they're each a minion of a different master, and their masters are fighting each other and manage to wipe each other out. And so you have these two minions left over, and they're like, well, now what? Like, what are we supposed to do now? And that part of that story involved one of the masters having built a summoning circle and summoning a female demon. And now that he's dead, she's stuck trapped in that circle in their basement. And so the minions go down there and say, like, oh, well, maybe we can use her for something. And she becomes part of a trio. It's one minion, or it's two minions and one demon, sort of trying to trape through a steampunk occult world. Now, all right, so if we take that approach, could we start with the premise of a high school boy Do we have to? I mean, there's always the temptation to head in the direction of Blade, to do a Dhampir, a half vampire. So if we instead do somebody who sells their soul to a demon. and becomes supernatural because of it. But I feel like that's not the way I want to go. It's something to potentially play with at some point, but I think what I'm going to do instead is have a look-see at that concept of binding a demon to you. Okay, so hear me out. So what we're going to start to do is an ordinary kid. This is going to sound a lot like an anime. You start out with an ordinary kid in an ordinary school, and they encounter a group of occultists who summon monsters and bind them to do their bidding. And this kid encounters this cult, tries to stop them doing something evil, and accidentally binds a demon to himself indefinitely. And then it becomes almost like Pokemon, where the summoned and bound demon is one you use to fight the other creatures. So now the question becomes, the kid you start with, male or female? All right, let's do it this way. One of the things that comes up too often in this type of story, I can think of like Inuyasha is a Japanese animation where a schoolgirl is sort of in control of a demon because he loves her. The alternative is the schoolboy is followed around by demoness who's in love with him and wants to win his favor. What if we just snap that right in the middle? Schoolgirl binds a demoness. I can see this working out a little bit better. There's still the risk. I mean, you could always still do the story of like she's bisexual or a lesbian and she falls in love with the demoness and the demoness is fine with it or whatever. But I don't think that's where I want this to go. What I want this to be is there isn't a romantic interrupter here. This is full on a regular teenager who gains an extraordinary ability, in this case, summoning a demon. Could at some point they combine? Oh, you know, if you have the means to summon it, what if you also have, over time, the ability to grow in your abilities? So that not only can you summon a demon or bind one to you, you could potentially bind more than one. And you can channel some of their abilities. And maybe even at some point merge with them. Could you do the same thing to angels? I feel like this works. I feel like it still has a flavor of a lot of anime to it, Japanese animation, but I feel like if we just treat it right, we could make this a Western style story, not a Japanese animation. Okay, so you're going to have a teenage girl at school who, for some reason, encounters a cult-like event happening and feels that they can't let it happen and must intervene. And in the intervention, end up accidentally bound to a summoned evil entity. And then, despite being scared about the implications, and despite not wanting to have that bound entity, knowing that that entity gives you abilities to interfere with other plans from the evil ones. I can see this working. I can see this actually working pretty well. I need to assemble the pieces a little bit better. So, teenage girl, a demoness. I feel like we need to have the demoness just be angry that such a piddly little worthless little girl is who she's stuck to. And like to a certain degree embarrassed, doesn't want to admit it and have it or have anybody find out about it. And at the same time, hoping that maybe she can corrupt the girl to become something dangerous and powerful so that it's not such an embarrassment to her. Do we want to do demons or do we want to do fae? I'll play with both approaches to that. But for right now, I think I'm going to call it for tonight. And I'll brainstorm on this a little bit more. I will come back to it tomorrow, I think. Till then, take care and have a good night.